now. There is a moment, and maybe you have lived it, where you check your bank account and the number staring back at you does not match the effort you have been putting in. You have been working hard. You have been showing up, and yet somehow the financial freedom you have been praying for feels further away than ever. That feeling is not a sign that God has forgotten you, but it might be a sign that something deeper needs to change. Today, we are not going to talk about money the way the world talks about it. We are not going to hand you a list of investment tips or tell you to cut your coffee budget. We are going to go somewhere far more important than your wallet. We are going to look at your habits, your mindset, and the invisible patterns that may be quietly stealing the life God designed for you. Because here's what most people never tell you. Poverty is not always about how much money you make. Sometimes poverty is a posture. Sometimes it is a way of thinking, a way of living, a way of responding to the world that keeps a person locked in cycles they cannot seem to break, no matter how hard they pray or how hard they try. And the painful truth is that many of these habits feel completely normal. They feel justified. They even feel spiritual sometimes. But God has something better. Proverbs 10:4 says, "Lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth." And while that verse is about more than money, it points to something real. The life God calls us to is a life of intention, discipline, and purposeful action. So let us walk through the 7 habits that keep people poor, not to shame anyone, but to set people free. The first habit is living without a vision. In Proverbs 5:18 p.m., the Word of God says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." And while that verse is talking about spiritual revelation, there is a practical truth buried inside it that cannot be ignored. People who consistently struggle financially are often people who have never taken the time to sit down and ask themselves one serious question: where am I actually going? Think about a man named Marcus. He grew up in a small town in Georgia, working odd jobs from the time he was 16. He was not lazy. He was one of the hardest workers anyone around him had ever seen. But when people asked Marcus what his 5-year plan was, he would laugh and say, "Man, I am just trying to survive this week." And so that is exactly what he did. Week after week, year after year, he survived. He never built. He never grew, because survival was the only target he had ever set, and he hit it every single time. Without vision, your energy has no direction. Without direction, your effort produces motion, but not progress. You can be busy your entire life and end up exactly where you started. God does not call us to wander. He calls us to be led. Jeremiah 5:11 p.m. reminds us that God has plans for us, plans to prosper us and not to harm us, plans to give us a hope and a future. But plans require participation. You have to seek the vision. You have to pray it through. You have to write it down and pursue it with your whole heart. The people who stay poor are often the people who have never decided what rich actually looks like for them. Not rich in the world's terms, but rich in purpose, in legacy, in generosity, in peace. When you do not have a clear picture of where you are going, you make decisions by default instead of by design. You spend money on what feels good today because tomorrow is just a blurry idea. Vision is not arrogance. Vision is stewardship. It is taking the gifts God placed in your hands and asking Him seriously, what do you want me to build with this? The second habit is choosing comfort over growth. Now, comfort is not a sin. Rest is scriptural. Jesus Himself withdrew to quiet places, but there is a difference between rest that restores and comfort that sedates. And a sedated life is one of the quietest traps the enemy has ever set. Proverbs 2:14 p.m. paints a vivid picture. As a door turns on its hinges, so a sluggard turns on his bed. That image is almost funny until you realize how many people it describes. Not people who are sleeping too much necessarily, but people who stay in jobs they hate because at least it is familiar. People who never start the business, never write the book, never go back to school, never have the hard conversation because the risk of the unknown feels more threatening than the certainty of a small, safe, comfortable life. Growth is always uncomfortable. Every person who has ever built something meaningful will tell you the same story with different details. There were nights of doubt. There were mornings of exhaustion. There were seasons where everything inside them screamed to quit, but they kept going. The people who chose comfort every single time those moments came are not the ones telling those stories. They are the ones watching from the sidelines, wondering why their life never changed. God never promised us a comfortable road. He promised us a guided one. He promised to be with us through the valley, not to remove the valley from our path. The discomfort you are avoiding right now might be the very thing standing between you and the breakthrough you have been praying for. Do not let the love of comfort cost you the life God designed for you. The third habit is poor stewardship of money. Luke 4:10 p.m. says, "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much." This is one of the most sobering financial principles in all of Scripture, and most people scroll right past it. Poor stewardship does not always mean spending recklessly on luxury items. Sometimes it looks much quieter than that. It looks like never tracking where your money goes. It looks like no savings plan, no budget, no understanding of the gap between what comes in and what goes out. It It looks like sending interest payments to a credit card company every month, money that could have been building your future. It looks like making just enough to cover the bills and calling that balance. There was a woman named Sandra who made $60,000 a year for 12 years straight. By the time she turned 42, she had no savings, no investments, and more debt than she started with in her 20s. She tithed faithfully. She was generous with family, but she had never once sat down and made a plan for her money. She assumed it would work itself out, and it never did. God is not going to send you more money to mismanage. That sounds harsh, but it is rooted in love. He is a good father, and a good father does not give a child more than the child is ready to handle. If you have been praying for financial increase and nothing has shifted, ask yourself this honest question: what am I doing with what I already have? Stewardship is not just a financial principle, it is a spiritual one. It is the foundation on which God builds bigger blessings. The fourth habit is surrounding yourself with the wrong voices. 1 Corinthians 3:33 p.m. says plainly, bad company corrupts good character. And while that verse is most often applied to moral behavior, it applies just as powerfully to your financial life, your ambitions, and your belief in what is possible for you. The people you spend the most time with are shaping you, whether you realize it or not. They are setting the ceiling for what you believe is achievable. They are defining what normal looks like. And if everyone in your closest circle is struggling and satisfied with staying stuck, their reality will slowly become your expectation. You will start making decisions that keep you at their level, not because you chose to stay small, but because you absorb the smallness of the environment around you. This is not about looking down on people or cutting off everyone who is struggling. That is not the heart of God, and it is not the lesson here, but it is about being honest about who is speaking into your life most consistently. Who are the voices you trust? Are they people who are building something? Are they people of faith who believe God can do the impossible? Are they people who challenge you, push you, and refuse to let you settle? Proverbs 1:20 p.m. says, walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. You will become who you walk with. That is not a motivational cliche. That is scripture. If the people around you have normalized poverty, normalized debt, normalized never saving and never dreaming, you will absorb that normal without even trying to. Guard your inner circle. Let God send you the right people, because the right relationship at the right time can change the entire trajectory of your life. The fifth habit is the fear of failure. This one runs deep. It is quiet and patient, and it disguises itself as wisdom. It sounds like, I am just being realistic. It sounds like, I have seen people try that and lose everything. It sounds like, that is not for people like me. But underneath all of those reasonable sounding sentences is a fear so powerful, it has stolen more destinies than any financial crisis ever could. Fear of failure keeps people from starting, and people who never start never fail, but they also never win. They live in a perpetual state of one day, of when the timing is right, and the timing is never quite right, because fear is endlessly creative when it comes to reasons why now is not the moment. Think about the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. 3 servants were given money by their master. 2 of them went out and multiplied what they were given, but the third buried his talent in the ground. When the master returned, that servant gave back exactly what he had been given, nothing more. And the master was not pleased. He was rebuked, not celebrated for being careful. The servant even admitted it himself. I was afraid, he said, and so I hid it. How many gifts has God placed in your hands that you have buried in the ground because you were afraid of what might happen if you tried and failed? Fear is a liar, and the enemy uses it masterfully to keep the children of God small, invisible, and poor. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. That spirit of fear you are carrying did not come from your father, which means you have the authority through Christ to set it down. Failure is not the end. For the believer, failure is tuition. It is a classroom where God teaches you things you could not have learned any other way. Every person whose story you admire has a chapter of failure buried somewhere in the middle of it. They just did not let it be the last chapter. Get up, try again, trust that the God who called you is faithful enough to catch you if you fall, and wise enough to use even your stumbling as part of the plan. The sixth habit is the refusal to invest in yourself. There is a version of frugality that is wise, and there is a version that is self-defeating. When someone refuses to spend money on education, on books, on courses, on any resource that could help them grow, and they call it being careful, they are confusing thrift with stagnation. Hosea 4:6 says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. The people who stay poor are often the people who stopped learning the moment they stopped being required to. They finished school and closed the book. They got the job and stopped developing their skills, they settled into what they already knew and called it good enough. But the world keeps changing. Industries shift, skills become obsolete, and the person who refuses to keep growing will eventually find that what they know is no longer enough to sustain the life they are trying to live. Investing in yourself is not selfishness, it is stewardship. When you sharpen your skills, you increase your value. When you expand your knowledge, you expand your options. When you work on your mindset and your emotional health, you become a person capable of handling bigger responsibilities and bigger blessings. God cannot pour the fullness of what He has for you into a container that has not been prepared to receive it. There was a man named David who spent 15 years complaining that he could not get promoted at work. He watched younger colleagues move past him and felt overlooked and frustrated. But when someone sat down with David and asked him what he had done in the last 5 years to grow in his field, he could not name a single thing. Not one book, not one seminar, not one course. He had given his employer the same version of himself for 15 years and expected to be rewarded for it. The man who stopped growing at 28 was standing at 43, wondering why the world had moved on without him. You are not too old to learn. You are not too far behind to catch up. And you are not too poor to invest in yourself, because the investment does not always require money. It requires the decision to grow on purpose. Read the books, take the class, seek the mentor, ask God to bring you into rooms where you are challenged, stretched, and sharpened, because the best investment you will ever make is in the person God created you to be. The seventh habit is the inability to delay gratification. We live in a culture that has engineered instant everything, instant delivery, instant entertainment, instant credit, and when your anchor environment is disagate around the you should have what you want right now. The spiritual discipline of waiting becomes almost countercultural, but waiting is not weakness. Isaiah 4:31 p.m. says, "Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." Waiting is not passive. It is active preparation. It is the season where character is built and roots go deep. The inability to delay gratification shows up in small ways every single day. It is the decision to buy the new phone on credit when the old one still works. It is the weekend spending spree justified because you had a hard week. It is the vacation charge to a card that will take 2 years to pay off. Each one feels small on its own, but collectively they build a wall between you and the financial future you keep saying you want. Think about Joseph in the book of Genesis, sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused and thrown into prison. Years passed, and Joseph could have grown bitter. He could have let his circumstances convince him that God had forgotten him, but he kept his integrity. He kept working with excellence. He kept trusting the God who had given him a dream when he was a teenager, even when that dream looked absolutely impossible from the floor of a prison cell. And when the moment finally came, when Pharaoh called for him and Joseph walked out of that prison and into his destiny, every single year of waiting made sense. The delay was not punishment, it was preparation. That promotion you are waiting for, that business that is not yet profitable, that dream that has not yet materialized, God has not forgotten any of it, but He is building something in you that can only be built through the process. And if you keep breaking the process by chasing immediate relief, you will find yourself starting over again and again, never quite arriving at the place you are trying to reach. Delayed gratification is not about deprivation. It is about prioritizing your future self over your present comfort. It is about making decisions today that your older self will be grateful for. It is about trusting that the seed you plant and water and tend faithfully will become something magnificent in its proper season. Galatians 6:9 says, "Let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up." Do not give up. That is the message underneath everything we have talked about today. Not one of these habits is a life sentence. Not one of them is too deeply rooted for God to uproot. Not one of them is more powerful than the spirit that lives inside a believer who decides today that enough is enough. You were not created to live check to check. You were not created to watch other people build while you wonder why your prayers are going unanswered. You were not created to be a slave to debt, to comfort, to fear, to the wrong voices, to ignorance, or to impulsiveness. You were created by a God who is Himself infinitely abundant, and He has deposited something in you that the world needs. But abundance does not fall from the sky onto people who have not prepared to receive it. It grows in the lives of people who have done the hard, quiet, daily work of becoming who God called them to be. It grows in the life of the person who wakes up early and prays before the day demands anything from them. It grows in the life of the person who sits down with their budget, not because they love spreadsheets, but because they love what God is trying to build through their faithfulness. It grows in the life of the person who says no to the easy thing today so they can say yes to the great thing tomorrow. So what do you do now? You start with one. You take one of these 7 habits habits and bring it before God with total honesty. You say, Father, I see this in my life. I see how it has been holding me back. I do not want to carry it anymore. Help me to change. And then you trust that the God who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. Philippians 1:6 is not just a verse to put on a wall. It is a promise from the living God to the person who is willing to do the work of transformation. Change is not comfortable. Growth is not instant. But the life on the other side of these habits, the life of true generosity, true peace, true financial freedom, and true purpose, it is more beautiful than anything you can achieve by staying exactly where you are. God is calling you forward. The question is whether today is the day you finally decide to walk in that direction. You are not too broken. You are not too far gone. You are a child of the Most High God, and that means the same power that raised Jesus from the dead is available to raise you out of every cycle, every pattern, every habit that has been keeping you from the life He promised. All of heaven is on your side. The question was never whether God was able. The question is whether you are willing. So be willing today. Start today, because today is not an accident. You did not stumble onto this video by chance. God is speaking to you right now, and He is saying the same thing He has always said to His people when they found themselves stuck, struggling, and wondering if things would ever change. He is saying, I have a plan for you. I have not forgotten you. Trust me with your habits. Trust me with your money. Trust me with your future. And watch what I will do with a life fully surrendered to my purpose. This is your moment. Not someday, not when things calm down. Right now, in the middle of the mess, in the middle of the struggle, this is where God does His best work. Let Him lead you out of every habit that has been keeping you poor and into the abundant life that Jesus said He came to give. John 10:10 says it clearly. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. The enemy wants your finances. He wants your peace. He wants your future. But he does not get to have it. Not today. Not anymore. Because you are choosing right now to walk in a different direction. Walk with vision. Walk with discipline. Walk with wisdom. Walk with the right people. Walk with courage. Walk with patience, trusting that every seed of faithful obedience you plant will produce a harvest in its proper time. That is the life God designed for you, and it is closer than you think. Complete